We're live.
Hello and welcome to the final day of the EU-India People Summit. The People Summit is happening while simultaneously the EU-India Diplomatic Summit is taking place in Portugal. For this hour, I have with me Ravinder Kaur, and we will be conversing on the economic roots of the Hindutva across the world and some of the neoliberal policies and how India has projected itself in the modern world as a make in India or a massive consumer or a massive economic nation. To give you the introduction of my guest today, Ravinder Kaur is a historian of contemporary India. She is Associate Professor of Modern South Asian Studies at the University of Copenhagen. Her core research focuses on the process of capitalistic transformations in 21st century India. This is the subject of her most recent book, Brand New Nation. Her ethnographic focus is broadly on decolonization, state formation, and making of modern citizenship. This was also the focus of our first book since 1947, Partition Narratives Among Punjabi Migrants of Delhi. She is currently engaged in a monograph project based on her long-term research on emerging markets and the ongoing capitalistic transformation in the global south. I also have with me my co-organizer, Alena Kahle, who is based in Sweden, is an inspiring researcher. She specialized in using law for social change in India. And she has been very vocal and verbal against the neoliberal ideologies in person-to-person relation, as well as in her research on healthcare and climate change policy. So welcome you both. And to start the conversation, I would give the floor to Ravindra first, and I would ask her to walk us through these economic roots of Hindutva across the globe as we are seeing in recent times. Please, Ravindra.
Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me here. I think I'll begin by saying that, of course, Hindutva or Hindu nationalism has a very long history. But it has not always been the center stage. It has been on the margins of Indian politics. But it is only at the turn of the century, just around that BJP, which is actually the political wing of RSS, Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, that it came to power. And that was the first phase, this is after the economic reforms, which are initiated in the early 1990s. And that government was, which was led by Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, that actually it sort of followed the route set out by the Congress party, which is the original party of neoliberal reforms. But it wasn't until 2014 when Mr. Narendra Modi comes to power that we really see the interlinkages between, cultural politics of Hindu nationalism and neoliberal economic reform. So I think this is what needs to be explained, that there is a distinct formula which comes into play, namely, what sometimes is called the Gujarat model. And Gujarat model is basically intense focus on hyper-nationalism, Hindu nationalism, but at the same time, promoting, India, or in this particular case, Gujarat, as an investment destination. And the whole idea of investment destination, I think everyone knows they may have heard of Vibrant Gujarat, which started in 2003. So Vibrant Gujarat Summit, for example, was, inviting investors from within India, other parts of India and other parts of the world to come and make investments in Gujarat. So in a way, it was reflecting the larger, programs which were launched by the central government at that time. Now, I think we need to understand what this investment destination model is all about. So this is basically that you reimagine the nation as a hub of global capital. And this basically means reimagining the nation itself and its territory, its people, its resources as factors of production, which can be put to, to enhance economic growth. and which, just try and pay attention to the language which is often used in this kind of discourse, namely that people are human capital or people are demographic dividend, right? So the notion is that, whatever produces profits, whatever produces economic growth is worthwhile. So I think this is the argument which I've been, presenting in my work as well, that how, economic growth in itself is seen as something which enhances the value, cultural value of the nation, right? So I think this is what the overall, Mr. Modi was actually able to bring these two things together very, very powerfully in the slogan of Achhe Din, the good times, which is actually presenting the dream of prosperity which lies ahead if we follow, and also, appreciation of the, Hindu civilizational culture.
Thanks a lot, Ravinder, for this. This kind of like also brings me to a question, a follow-up question from that, because you have been saying that also in your book, you mentioned that, the India is being projected as an investment hub and a capital, but do you, in your discourse or otherwise, do you consider that India does have that capacity? Because we did see Make in India coming up in the past. It was a good optic, good show, but isn't it from an economic perspective that we can argue, or rather, that India has never really been an industrial nation? It was either farming or the service sector. So I just wanted to know from your opinion what you think about it.
No, I think, of course, all nations, all people have capacity. If they want to manufacture, of course, they can do that. And please recall that during the anti-colonial movement, one of the central points was that we need economic independence, right? That we want to be the manufacturing hub, in the sense that you do not want to import every little thing, and that is the colonial cycle of extraction of resources, production, and selling it back. Namely, for example, cotton. Cotton cloth that you produce, turn India into this field, where cotton is produced. You take it back to the factories in England, then you bring it back to India to, sell to Indian people, and which is the basis of the Khadi movement, self-reliance, right? So where people actually started burning factory-made clothes. The reason I'm mentioning this is that to manufacture things locally has, of course, been very central to many of these political movements. So I would say, of course, India has the capacity to do it. But I would say that, now this is I would say a little bit ironic, because Mr. Modi precisely comes to power because he wants to do this economic miracle, right? Because he understands that Hindutva nationalism in itself is not enough to capture political power, that you also need to do the economic part. Now, the tragic thing all of this is that in the last 7 years, India has actually not fulfilled that potential. And this is, I'm again repeating, it's ironic because, in 2014 and 12-13, those preceding 2 years, if you recall, there was a massive anti-corruption movement, making of the Aam Aadmi, common man. And what was the basic, grouse or, the anger that the public had, or the anxiety which there was, that India is not doing enough, that India has the potential, but it isn't reaching the potential. And at that time, India was seen that it is almost as close to China, in terms of economic growth, that it is almost going to displace China. But then, BJP says that, well, we promise that we will do it. This is the basis of Achhe Din, right? And ironic thing is, in the last 7 years, Indian economic growth has actually fallen rapidly down. So I think in that sense, I would say, of course, there is capacity, but those policies, or learning the wrong lessons, I would say the lessons learned were wrong. Namely, there is too much focus on spectacle, on creating a public image that something has been done, where many of these operations, they require hard work, which, a different kind of investment, I would say.
I find it very valuable that you point out that it's a branding to show that things are being done without actually having to produce the facts and the figures behind it. When I read your book, your Brand New India book, the first time, I laughed out loud repeatedly, just thinking, oh my God, that guy is really capable of making like a movie brand, a company brand out of his entire country. You know, when I first went to India years ago, I had that brochure in my hand saying Incredible India. You arrive at the airport and it tells you Incredible India. It was like a person doing yoga on a mountain. Then there's things like the Made in India thing coming up recently. There's Swachh Bharat, which has a theme song, which I still find hilarious. And that song is so catchy, I would listen to that for fun. It's a really good theme song for a government campaign to build toilets and sanitation. It's kind of funny in that sense. And since the Modi government came to power, all these funds and schemes have been taking on acronyms and abbreviations that sound like fun, actual indigenous names. And even, well, okay, pharmaceuticals in general always have funny names, but COVAX, that's a great title. That's a great title for a vaccine. It's catchy. But is this inherently bad, is what I'm wondering? Could that be a good tool, or is it just that it's being wielded in a way to cover up that nothing is being done?
No, so I wouldn't say whether it's good or bad, because our job is to see through all this. And I would say that there is nothing new that publicity campaigns happen, because this is what, governments do or companies do, or, so there's nothing new in that. But I think what I have found, and please remember that many of these projects, programs of branding, publicity, they begin in mid-1990s, and which is when, the Congress party is in power. And Congress party has also been in power for 10 years in between. So regardless of the government in power, these things have happened, right? So India Brand Equity Foundation, which is, it is a government public-private partnership between CII, Confederation of Indian Industries, and the Ministry of Commerce, right? So there's nothing new in that. But what I have been struck by is that, during the, Modi government, the last few years, that spectacle literally has overtaken the essentials of governance. What I mean to say is that it has taken precedence, right? Because, for example, during the Corona lockdown, for instance, last year, if you recall, that most governments around the world were preparing for a lockdown. But actually, it is in India that we had a very ritualistic public spectacle of lockdown. First, what was called Janta Curfew, where the entire nation with due publicity was invited to take part, right? And then after that, and I compare that with, because I live in Denmark, right? So in Denmark, it was being done in a very somber kind of way, that you would have this, committee of people, led by the Prime Minister, and they would make, almost like every couple of days or something, they would make briefings, and they used to be very somber, simple affairs, right? Like literally communicating. But India was totally in contrast. So we can actually, because I think the thing about Corona is that it's the same problem which was being addressed by governments around the world. And you could see that how India stood apart from all that, right? So the point here is that spectacle has overtaken. It has literally become a form of governance. But I think this is the problem, that we are seeing that things are falling apart at this moment, because spectacle can do a bit, but not everything.
I have a follow-up question on that, Ravinder. You are talking about the public spectacle of the Hindu nation, as we have seen under the Modi government. How far do you see this spectacle also in terms of the diaspora groups, perhaps, like which have been projecting the Hindutva ideologies and Hindu ideas outside in the world and globally otherwise? So please.
So I would say that diaspora is tremendously important. Diaspora for, I think until 1990s, it wasn't seen as an important part of what happens in India, because, diaspora has always been seen as people who have sort of left, they have left the ground, they're no longer part of it. But I think the idea of nationhood, nation as a network, where you can be placed in different localities, but yet be an extension of the nation. I think that has become predominant since the 1990s, also aided by the fact that we have virtual modes of communication, which didn't exist before. And together with that, something fundamental took place, which is, the OCI scheme, the Overseas Indian or Person of Indian Origin, which was an extension to the diaspora to say that, well, you are, sons and daughters of Mother India, right? And as we have just mentioned that, diaspora organizations have always been there, but at this moment, then they, came to the forefront. And actually, it is BJP which has been extremely good at, harvesting the gains from the diaspora. They are very, very active in that. And I think it is more in USA, UK, and less so in Europe as such, right? And I think the most prominent examples we have are, during the Trump, during the American election. I think, like organizing these huge spectacles, Howdy Modi, and I think there was something in London also which took place, which was massive, and Gujarati diaspora was particularly involved in that, right? So I think in that sense, diaspora has become a very important tool in bending public opinion in different parts of the world.
Can I just stay on this conversation for a bit and also maybe come to certain difficult aspects of it on how the role of the Sangh Parivar has been in not just building this spectacle, but has for example, we saw this massive PM Care funds getting instituted in India at the beginning of the COVID crisis, but we don't really know it's a wall of opaqueness over there. We also saw, as you mentioned in the US, that there were rallies, but we also saw economic transactions happening in funding candidates to the political scene. We have seen that kind of engagement also in UK in the recent past. Basically funding our public officers in the political landscape to to pitch out the Modi agenda or the Hindutva agenda. So how do you see that in your scholarship, or what's your opinion on the economic effects of this Hindutva massiveness which is around the world around us?
Nick, would you repeat that?
I wanted to know, how do you see that? If you can walk us a little bit through on those aspects and the economics itself of the spectacle of the Hindu nation and the role of the diaspora in creating that massive economic spectacle of the Hindu nation. So,
I think that is a little bit difficult for me, because I have not particularly in my own work traced the specific roots, but I think I have more been focused on the ways in which I'm just because I think I do not have any, I cannot answer that fully, that what would be the, if there are any particular economic connection. But I think what we could mention is, for example, there are NGOs, maybe that's worth mentioning here. About this FRCA rule, which disallows foreign contributions to NGOs. And I think this is where some of the Hindutva organizations have been very active, that they have been able to, funnel the funds to India bypassing or, actively encouraged, whereas other organizations, say, for example, Amnesty International, it simply had to shut its door, right? So I think in that sense, maybe a ground has been created where, funds can be channeled, into India, but for specific purposes.
Yes, it's kind of true because whenever we have as diaspora done a drive for raising funds also, and this is a situation that we have also faced in the past, that we were not able to select NGOs which we would think are more secular in nature because they would not have FCRA clearances.
Yes.
So there will be difficulty to channeling funds to them, even if it is a humanitarian relief fund or any such thing. But then you have Seva International or PM Care funds, which doesn't require, which perhaps does require FCRA, but does have the clearances as well. And we don't know on what grounds. So the transparency is not really there. And then we were able to do that.
I think we could maybe mention here also the struggles which go within the center state within India. Like, recall that there was this flood situation in Kerala, a few years ago, and a lot of people wanted to donate, including foreign governments, foreign NGOs, foreign entities, and they were not allowed to do that. Yeah. And this is despite the Chief Minister of Kerala saying that they would actually welcome at this moment because Kerala was devastated, right? So I think in a sense, and this is where I think the whole idea that what allows you to completely enclose the nation in a way that you literally control all these lines, like you open the parts that you would like to open, but you can also close the others. And maybe I should mention, I think it is a few weeks ago or a couple of months ago, Prime Minister Modi, he made a speech where he wrote about, where he spoke about FDI. FDI means foreign direct investments. And he said that we welcome foreign direct investments, but not the other FDI, which is foreign destructive ideology. He loves making those acronyms. But in this case, it literally gives you a glimpse into the simultaneous openness and closure. And this is I think one of the arguments that I've been trying to propose, that how you begin to imagine the nation as an enclosure where capital is welcome, it is mobile, but other avenues of movement are controlled, restricted, under surveillance, and actually restricted.
On that note, a few days ago, I wanted to donate, to some NGO in India to make sure that my money is not in my bank account, but somewhere where it can be used. And there, what Ritumbra was describing, I was really struggling to find a place that I trust, because those who I do trust are not given that clearance. And so when I had to choose if I'm Indian or a foreign national, and then when I clicked foreign national, the page just shut down and wouldn't let me click anything. And one of the things that I was particularly trying to get is funds and money to Kashmir, because I am incredibly passionate about politics in Kashmir. I find it both on an academic level as well as on a personal level infuriating, I suppose is the word. And I would like you to perhaps explain a little bit how settler colonialism in Kashmir is justified and legitimized through this branding, through this spectacle of bringing development to Kashmir. How recently, the whole Srinagar reconstruction plan is all about making it a tourism destination and building new houses and getting all those infrastructure into the valley. And at the same time, Kashmiris locals say, well, actually, our human development index indicators are much better than in the rest of the country. We don't need what you were promising for us. So what's the narrative there? How is it justified?
So I think, on 5th August 2019, I'll just walk you back. When the news came, I think it was around 11 o'clock in the morning here, Ella, in India, that the parliament has decided that now we are going to revoke Article 370. Now, very few people noticed that I think within half an hour or simultaneously, there was another news saying that, there will be a Jammu and Kashmir investment summit which will be held. And I think since I work on investments or the politics of investment, I paid attention, but most people would not pay attention. This is because that was in the business pages of newspapers and the other was in the politics. So I think here, when you put together these two different things, politics and economy, it becomes clear to you that it is literally the promise of growth, prosperity via, investments, which is held out. Like it is the same model, investment destination model that look, Jammu and Kashmir, investment summit will be held, and now we have taken control, development was not happening here. So this is the argument which is proposed. And what you could immediately notice is that several people from the business groups, from the industry lobby groups, they immediately started saying, well, we welcome this, it's a long awaited move, because then that becomes that you forget the political part or the human rights or all those questions which are uncomfortable. Then you put them aside and you focus on a future which is built upon capitalist growth, right? So I think this model has been attempted nearly in every part of India. And I would say this is not a very Indian story either. This has become something which has become, in large parts of the global South, where, the promise which is held out to you is that, wait, there is something more better coming for you. Just bear with this, right? So I think in that sense, I would not know that what exactly, because I haven't visited Kashmir so I don't know what the narrative inside is, because recall that everything was shut. And I think a lot of people that we knew, just on social media, I mean, those people disappeared for a very, very long time because there was no internet, or it was very low, like 2G or something for some time, right? So I think in that sense, and here's the irony, that investment summit has never taken place. Because the thing is that I kept on following. I would look like, when is that summit? They postponed, then it was again postponed. I have not heard. Now we are in 2021, it hasn't happened. And that is ironical because, for something like that to happen, for people to go and invest and create businesses, you do need some sort of peace to exist, right? So in this kind of atmosphere, I think investors would not even want to go, perhaps. So I think in a way, this whole model has its own, fragilities, weaknesses, that it doesn't always work.
You're bringing up a really good point, that the state is so clinging to this neoliberal ideology, growth ideology, endless growth promise, that it's causing immense instability and frustration with those who are the losers of that model. And in that sense, the state is then using security laws, military power, weapons, prison, all of these restrictive, violent measures to protect its neoliberal economic growth. What I always wonder is, where does this obsession come from? What is it about the economic growth idea that it would legitimize such measures? I suppose there's different answers if we look at what's going on inside of the government's head. I'm not sure if we can answer that, versus I suppose what the voters believe and what the promise of economic growth gives to voters. That is a little bit better to understand. Could you illuminate both sides, if that's even possible?
I would say it's the other way around, that it is, that the fact that you can have political control, is because you can promise economic growth. What I mean to say is that, of course, it's a very long history that we are drawing upon, that, major shifts which take place where economic growth in itself becomes the recipe that many governments around the world, appropriate in order to, establish their own, what you would say, their own legitimacy, right? Now, the thing is that after the Second World War, like Germany, for example, Germany came to be seen as, an economic miracle, where it just turned around by focusing after the war destruction on, capitalist growth, production, and that became something that you would contrast and compare with the Eastern part, right? And that example has been going around, like Singapore, a little state that in itself became this little economic miracle. And despite not having any kind of natural resources or, large territory or anything to speak of, but at the same time, it demanded obedience from the population. So Singapore, when people speak about that example, everyone knows that you're also submitting, the neoliberal economics and a form of, authoritarianism. And when we spoke about the East Asian tiger economies, the same thing took place. Like there is a measure of control over the population, but at the same time, like the promise of growth. And I mean, we are not even touching China. China is the perfect example of this bringing together these two things, right? So I think what I'm trying to, by bringing you to different parts of the world, to show that actually it has become a matter of common sense around the world that, market reforms come to be seen as a form of modernity, as a path to progress. Right? So which basically means that when you want to, remake your image, like to make a shift or to bury something in the past, move on, then you would say, well, you see, now this so-and-so dictator leader is doing economic reform, so it is totally okay. Right? So I think because from like different parts of the world, just go and see how, the book that I've written, I mean, of course, it is rooted in India, but that same example, or same argument can be made for many different parts of the world. So here, that's the point I'm making, that, the promise of economic growth as the route to prosperity, progress, etc., that has become a matter of common sense, which is very different from the 20th, the beginning of the 20th century, where socialism was the way forward. And that has been supplanted by capitalism in this century.
I can ask you one question, because you have also written about India and China and the identity and the models over there. So do you see any kind of like convergences or divergences in these two economy? And I ask you this specifically in the context of this, that over the last week, we have seen that European Union has pivoted from China and is focusing more towards India as a trading partner. And this is definitely on the table today as the EU-India Diplomatic Summit takes place. And we have also previously spoken to the chair of the EU-India delegation, who was constantly repeating that, yes, India has problem, but it's still not China. So, but do you see any kind of similarities and divergences in how these economies are progressing, and what would that mean in terms of the human cost? Or one, and second, what would it mean in terms of space for investment for the European Union, whether European Union should be bothered about the human cost at all, or whether it would be just bothered about its own business interests? So what's your opinion on that?
I mean, this is it's a very fascinating moment we are in, because I don't think so we have very clear answers, but what we do know is that especially, after the, after the pandemic, because remember, the misgivings for China were already there, right? So the so-called decoupling was taking place. But then the drop was a pandemic, and the charge that Chinese government is trying to hide something, that they are not open, transparent, etc. Right? And then came the question of supply chains, that how far should you be dependent upon China? Okay, so I think that has created a very favorable environment for other countries around China, which are competing. And India is, of course, at the forefront. And India is not only comparable in size, demography, etc., to China, but it also offers an alternative in terms of the political system, namely democracy, which European Union or other Western governments feel more comfortable with, right? And I think the thing about India is that I think everybody knows that there have been a lot of surveys, reports which show that democracy is eroding in India. And for example, I think one simple thing is that most people do not realize or know, and they get shocked to hear that the Prime Minister of India has never held a press conference in the last 7 years. And I think that small, it's a small thing, but it's a very big thing. That in a democracy that you do not present yourself to media scrutiny. So it is a one-way dialogue, which does not befit a democracy. So I think in that sense, India is in a very favorable situation that it has much to gain from being democratic. So which begs the question that, why would you not want to open up, right? In this democratic sense. So I think European Union, wants to make, good relations for India. And it has historically had good relations with India, right? So I think my guess is that India is going to be a strong partner for the European Union for many parts of the world, regardless of which political party is in control. And that has to do with the size, demography, I think it simply cannot be ignored.
I'd like to shift our focus again to the very micro scale, to individual people and how the ideology of economic growth and neoliberalism has really permeated all aspects of society worldwide, yes, but with a specific Indian touch, I suppose. So to bring in a personal anecdote, the first time I traveled to India, I stood in front of a school and there was a huge poster on the school wall with the face of the person who got the best score on his exam. And it just said his name and the face and number 1. And it was this huge merit thing. And then I talked to some friends and they prided themselves in being the exam topper. To me, this was a totally foreign concept. I grew up in Germany. I did go to other education systems as well. But for me, it was, I get a good grade, I get an A, but there's no such thing as the number 1 exam topper. And I'm not sure, of course, of how this was 20 years ago before India opened up and its economy and really the neoliberal ideology permeated. But I do see some parallels there with this idea of previously, before the 1990s, the upper caste Hindus felt very neglected. There were caste-based reservations here, reservations there. And then finally, they've got their merit back. If they do well, it's because they actually performed well. And this, of course, then means that a lot of the students in the IITs and the best education facilities in the country and those who actually go abroad, that they pride themselves in their accomplishments and perhaps neglect that this is not their own doing completely, but that they come from privileged positions. Do you see this as a symptom of a larger upper caste kind of trying to find back their roots and their identities, or am I just interpreting too much here?
No, I think first of all, I would say that celebration of toppers is not something new, because you can continue scrolling back and you would see that with how much pride, people would put their degrees. Actually, they don't do it anymore, but from, our parents, grandparents' generation, you would see people would put BA, MA, PhD, whichever, if they had gone abroad, of course, all of those things were literally proudly displayed. And actually sometimes on walls, I don't see it anymore, but when I was younger, you would actually see where somebody's description would be so-and-so name and then say 10th fail. Or, and basically what it meant, like one would laugh, but basically what they're trying to say is that I did reach 10th class. I didn't pass it, but I made it until then, right? So leave alone toppers. But the fact that you can say 10th fail, I mean, that in itself, but this is very, very long. Nobody does that anymore. And also 10th class
and
is
I
not.
must apologize for my probably quite modern colonial mindset on this question.
No, there's nothing about that. But what I'm saying is that celebration of merit or celebration in this way, I think there is nothing new in that, because I'm also very worried, like very mindful that we should not put everything down to the economic reforms, because I think it becomes a self-sufficient explanation that there was an India before and after, but there are many lineages which continue to be transformed, and we must be mindful of, right? The other thing that you're speaking about, that how merit becomes the domain of upper caste, and it's a code word. Merit is used as a shorthand in politics. And in my own book, in one of the chapters, I'm showing that the excessive focus on merit also is to do with the fact that, along with economic reforms, around the same time in India, Mandal Commission report was also implemented. Mandal Commission report is about giving reservations to the, other backward classes, right? The Shudras. And this basically meant that people who had, less influence or access to educational or governmental, the corridors of power, that they too are entering. So along with, scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and OBCs also begin entering all these domains. And that is when the upper caste, a lot of movements begin, and they don't call them upper caste, but the caste is not even mentioned. It is all about, merit, like youth movements. And actually Arvind Kejriwal, by the way, the Chief Minister of Delhi, he came into, politics through one of those movements. I think, if I'm not wrong, it was called Youth for Equality. And they used very, progressive terminology like equality in order to make a case for, like why we should not have reservations, for instance, right? So, and at the same time, what happens is that economy is opening up. More and more private sector multinational companies start coming to India. So people, meritorious people who felt deprived, that they had lesser share of the government jobs, they started drifting towards private sector, which is why you would often hear that people who work in the corporate sector, they see themselves, as, far better or far, because private sector is where there is no reservation. So it is actually seen as a domain which is purely meritorious. Okay. And at the same time, please pay attention that anti-corruption movements begin picking up, where anti-corruption is solely seen in relation to the government. Because please recall that it's not like private sector does not have corruption. Actually, it is companies which pay big time bribes and kickoffs and whatnot. So corporate, corruption is a very big thing, right? But during the political movements which were anti-corruption, no one actually brought in the private sector. It was solely focused on politicians, bureaucrats, public, like policemen, and this and that, right? So this can only be understood by these competing factors which happen, like, competing influences of, caste reservations, coming of the, arrival of the multinational companies, and how the upper caste begin different, diverting, drifting towards the private sector, and how merit actually becomes literally a code word which signifies, caste, privilege, but without ever mentioning it.
I find, you brought up the concept of that anti-corruption movement and the Oath campaign. And I recall that when I was reading your book, Brand New Nation, I stumbled a little bit upon that section, and there were some things that I would like you to clarify here, and I do think that they fit into the wider conversation we're having. So you talked about the Times Group investing in that anti-corruption movement through promotional materials, putting big posters on their pages in their Times newspapers. And you said that you found this surprising because of the Times Group's pro-capitalist stance. And when me and my friends read that part, we were thinking, well, yes, capitalism and corruption do go hand in hand because they are both about accumulation of wealth, but also in order to function properly, capitalism is not okay with corruption. It needs to have secure property rights. Capitalism needs an anti-corruption movement to function. So could you explain a little bit more why you were so surprised that the Times Group would support an anti-corruption movement, and what the larger argument is in which you placed this observation? And
I think, so these are two separate things you're talking about. One is the surprise, because the Times of India was bankrolling a big publicity campaign called Lead India campaign. And in 2007, 8, 9, that was the time anyone who lived in India, they would have noticed it was actually a TV reality show, because it was that anxiety that I'm speaking about, that India is not going ahead, that India has huge potential to become the next China, if only our politics or government was doing better, right? So the idea of Lead India campaign was that people choose who will lead India. And it became a reality show where week after week, just like in other reality shows that you would eliminate, people would vote out, and then there was one winner. I think he had, I'm just forgetting, he had, engineering, technical, management background, exactly the kind combination that the middle classes love and think of as meritorious, okay? And eventually the winner, he became an MP from BJP. And in later years, he left it. So I don't know, I never heard of him again. I don't know what happened to him. So what my surprise was, well, Times of India is one of those papers which pioneered something called advertorials. You know, the editorial and advertisements. So they made it into one combined thing. Advertorials, basically, they would plant advertisements disguised as editorials or newspaper reports, right? So in other words, that they would just mint money. They simply said that, they don't even do book reviews, by the way, Times of India, because the idea is, that why should we give free publicity to the authors? But if only you can do something in return, that they would, give you publicity, right? In other words, nothing that they do is for non-profit. Then the question, why would they bankroll such a major campaign where front pages would be occupied by the Lead India movement, asking people to go to vote and whatnot? So the philanthropy of this. So when I called up, the first time Times of India, because I was very eager to speak to some editor to understand why were they doing that. So they put me through, the line, and then someone answered and he said, I'm from the marketing department. Then I actually apologized, said, I'm sorry, but I wanted to speak to somebody in the editorial. He said, no, you're just at the right spot. I handle, the Lead India campaign. And I was like, what? The marketing department handles this philanthropic thing? And that is what led me to realize that, this is a far greater proposition, because it is also Times of India, because this is based on many interviews that I'm just telling you the short version of this, which is that Times of India saw that among the middle classes, which is their target group, that there was this anxiety that India is not doing well, and they could increase their consumer base, the readership, by showing that the newspaper cares. And I think this should not be underestimated, that how you can, put to work these emotions that we care for you, for example, they launched a, Calcutta, edition of Times of India, or other cities. Each time they would do, then they would pick up something which mattered to the local citizens and then throw in publicity money, right? So this is the surprise that I'm trying to understand, the corporate logic of philanthropy here, that why would you want to throw money into this, right? The other part is the more, when you say that capitalism requires, what did you say? That capitalism requires some sort of like lack of corruption, right?
A certainty of property rights, a stability that what I own now, I will own tomorrow, a knowledge of how much things will cost, that type of thing.
Sure, but I would not call it, incorruption. I understand what you mean, that what you're speaking about, that your rights are, well protected. Okay, and especially, the liberal rights of ownership, private property, etc. But I think to say that capitalism does not thrive, in corrupt societies, that is not correct. Because, and it also depends on how you define corruption. And corruption, as far as the political drift of it, is that corruption is seen as, when you ask people to give examples, so what is corruption? They literally, often people say, oh, but the policeman who stopped me on the road and he gave me fine, then I gave 100 rupees and then they said, go, right? So this is like one of those examples. And it's petty, small things people speak about in everyday life. What they do not want to speak about is the big time kickbacks, lobby work, the suspense accounts, which are all dark. Most companies have that. But, and that does not mean that there is no pressure on them. I think recently the Swedish, I'm just forgetting the name, like there is this, just a scandal brewing up basically with Sweden, isn't it?
Yes, I think it has to do with the payment, again, of large amounts of money to have their buses, or
yes,
something like that, tour buses.
I'm forgetting the details here. So, but just to say that, a lot of, rights groups, transparency, they are putting pressure on companies that, these, practices should not be, that they are not acceptable, right? But I'm just forgetting the specificities of this case. But just to say that kickbacks or corruption within the corporate world, it's not like it doesn't exist. Actually, it exists, but not in the way that we recognize.
You're bringing up the very relevant point of this Western idea of corruption and how often it is done in corruption indexes. One of my professors or inspirations is a corruption researcher in Uzbekistan, and he has talked extensively to police officers, and those petty corruption examples are corruption in hospitals, and has really put this into a perspective to say, well, often the police officers actually don't get paid a living salary, and they're told, here's some tickets, sell these to traffic violators in order to get by and make sure that you get a living wage. So in that sense, how we define corruption is different. And the Swedish Scania bus deal then is a different form that is also corruption, although of a very different form with a very different meaning. So thank you for pointing that out.
I think somebody in the chat has put the Swedish Scania bus deal, which I'm not totally on top of the details, but I think they're referring to that. And also, I think in the academic literature, if you would often see that corruption is described as something which happens with the public office. So private sphere is not mentioned there at all. So it is literally if you're misusing the public office in some way. But of course, anthropologists will tell you, well, this is not how it works, right? So this is just to say that the very popular notion of what corruption constitutes is literally that somebody who sits in some government office, public office, is misusing or extracting profits out of it.
Lord, Alena, if you have any final questions.
My final question, of course, would be to now take this back to the big picture in the light of the European Union today talking to Modi via video call, probably very briefly, but still Modi will be there to basically pitch an idea, an offer. And what does our conversation right now mean? What are the implications for the EU who really wants to invest? Are investments now absolutely a risk that we should all be wary of because they're hidden by a false narrative of branding and glorification? Or is there some way that investment can still be something that we don't have to completely deconstruct and point out that it's risky and dangerous?
And if I can add to that, how do you actually see this relationship going forward? Is it going to be in terms of like just investment, or rather more collaborative process going forward? Because there will definitely be EU-India relations developing further, also geopolitically being more important and strategic in the coming years. So where do you see this? And also, what will be the would EU be able to see across the branding image to the real India which exists behind the wheel of branding? So that is just an addition to that.
I think everyone can see what it is. So I think that is, but I think the way I think about the EU-India relationship is, as I said before, I think regardless of the government in power, I think, EU and India relations would go ahead, which is to do with historical political reasons, which are not limited by any particular government. So in that sense, I think I would say even if there was a Congress government in power, of course, this would happen, right? And I think maybe we have to think that when people speak about EU-India summit or meet, then they often speak about government to government, and where companies or business delegations are always a part. But what the contribution of what you're doing here, organizing, is actually broadening out what it means to have EU-India relations, where the people who inhabit these places also firmly become a part of that relationship, which will only make it more stronger and meaningful. So I just think to speak about EU-India purely in those terms, state to state, business to business, I think it's only half the story, or in a very narrow way of looking what it would mean for people of these two parts of the world, to have something to do with each other. So I think maybe we should focus more on that, by bringing people into dialogue. And, I also must say that when we speak about, non-governmental relations, for some weird reason, people end up speaking about, cultural, cultural connections in a very narrow sense, which literally becomes to like cultural shows or something. That's not that's not what I mean, because there are progressive groups, forces in European Union, in India, like youth population, which really want to make the world a better place. And for example, the whole focus on climate change, for example, has been something where people have come together in ways which you would not have imagined before, right? So I think my focus would be on, how to broaden out. Like, what does it mean? When people say, I love India, then I think we must begin questioning, what does it mean to love India? Does it, like what aspects of it do you like or love? So for me, people who inhabit that land are tremendously important, that we must be able to, think in terms of those human relationships, human interactions, which are often missing.
Ravinder, for this very beautiful conversation with us today on this very wide topic. And as I told you earlier, and as we have been repeating also through our summit, that we will be making a people's roadmap with all these interventions that all our speakers made, and we will be advocating that with the European Parliament and the progressive leadership of the Western European countries, at least, going forward, to also try to set some agendas within the diplomatic summit, that how this people-to-people interactions and how this worries and concerns which are transnational and beyond one's national heritage or one's national connection should be pitched in the center of the diplomatic relations as well. So I thank you on behalf of all the team for being with us today for this conversation, and we will see the audience who might be watching this you again in half an hour with our final panel of the second final panel of the day, which is on climate change and climate policy. So thank you
so much. Look forward.
This has been wonderful. Thanks for answering my reader questions.
Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure and look forward to it.
Alena, if you can stop the streaming, then maybe we can have